Welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. So now I'm joined by Cian O'Flaherty, CEO of Safecility. Cian, you're very welcome today.
Thanks, Carol. Great to see you.
And I'm delighted to have you here today. Obviously, we take a huge interest in PropTech and smart city solutions that we see coming on, and especially those that are deemed and catering to emergency services and emergency solutions. So you might just talk to us and tell people about Safecility and what the core offering is.
Sure. So Safecility sits in solutions that are addressing the estate owner or the estate manager's legal obligations to keep building tenants safe during an emergency. So like life safety systems that we'd all be familiar with, like fire alarms, emergency lighting, sprinkler systems, and as well as that, other safety like gas and smoke detection or Legionella and water. So when we were starting out developing the startup, what we were really curious about is how much of this process remains highly manual. I think you'd recognize this looking at how many other businesses have really transitioned into digital first. Property remains one of the sort of really low-hanging fruits in digitization. So hardware that automates the legally required testing, and we've developed a cloud engine that manages legal compliance. So an estate manager with a footprint across Europe can use our software to handle all of the testing and inspection routines for millions of properties if that's what they have, and see it all there on the front end in their Safecility application.
Very good. You're still at the stage that could be classified as a startup, really within the first few years. So where have your early customers come from? I mean, do you tend to deal with asset managers directly or landlords directly? Is it asset managers?
Yeah, in the first instance, we've seen real traction from actual asset managers within large estates. So we've done work in Ireland here with Limerick City Council and Smart Dublin. And on top of that, we've had quite a lot of interest in the UK from housing authorities that manage, tens of thousands of properties across quite large footprints. So we've worked with Vivid Homes in the UK, Halton Housing, Barcud, which is formerly Mid Wales Housing, to name but a few. And they have the genuine challenge of an asset portfolio of 10,000 maybe units across an entire county. And teams that are going door to door to these blocks inspecting on a quarterly basis. And when they finish, they go right back to the start. So it's an extraordinary expense being incurred for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Cian, what was your background? Were you in the property industry yourself?
I used to work in lighting. Oddly enough, we spent a lot of time on LED lighting and energy efficiency. But the real attraction for me was to try and deliver something that became, a reliable service for the customers. We were delivering products solely at the time, and I think there was a real opportunity. We realized with emergency lighting, for example, when somebody is installing energy efficiency lighting, we're walking out the door, and somebody is coming straight in to sign a contract to maintain the testing and legal obligations for the next 5 years. So once technology can do that, there's no reason for that to be done in person. The quality of the inspection and the quality of the reporting goes away up.
And in terms of, I think that's something that was overly manual and was considered very burdensome by the industry. But in terms of compliance, working across the Ireland and the UK, have there been many differences there in terms of compliance?
I think there was a real shift after the fire in Grenfell Tower. I think we'll all recognise that as the final act of the previous regulatory philosophy. So while it's still a very emerging replacement to Grenfell, it's clear that there is far higher expectations around performance. We're going to have named duty holders in the law in the UK. And I think we're seeing a lot of Irish behaviours. In many senses, we're quite good at compliance in our own right, and in some practices would have been more advanced than, say, what we'd have seen in the UK. But I think what's going to be increasingly likely is that a named officer in these agencies is going to be in charge of making sure that tenants or customers or occupants of buildings are safe. And to do that, they have to do their inspections under the law. And having a named person is a real change. Philosophically, it's always been possible to put things in the passive voice. A fire has happened or an emergency took place. Now, increasingly, a named officer means that, Mr. X is responsible for the failure to prevent the loss of life in this emergency. And I think the next 10 years are potentially an enormous shift in investment in this space to make buildings safer.
But then how much of an investment needs to happen? Because what you're talking about there, you're right, when you attach a name to it and personal responsibility, it takes on another dimension altogether. And of course it shouldn't, but it does. That's just human nature. Yeah. But for firms in Ireland, so say, for example, property managers, who might be dealing with, 500 units, what will this mean for them?
Yeah, I think if they were to follow their traditional practices, the budget for compliance and inspection is going to balloon. I think we probably can all appreciate that a regulator is going to continue regulating, irrespective of the cost of it. And it's not always an argument they're responsive to. What we're seeing is that our position, we deliver technology and it does require an investment, but over 5 years, it cuts the cost in half. So, against a backdrop of ballooning regs and ballooning compliance obligations, your only option we see is to make the investment in the technology that's going to limit how much upside cost there is in these changes to regulation. So, a client may look at it and say, in year one, we're going to spend, 2 years of our budget. But by the end of year 5, you're probably only going to have spent, 2.5 years of the 5-year budget. So there's a saving there in the long term. And the reg changes are coming irrespective of how you approach it. I think we're really seeing asset managers who have a very heavily outsourced function. They're really worried because one of the things that's changing is by putting a name inside the company, somebody has to see the paper and information flow. And a lot of the outsourced operators tend not to share that. No malice, it's just easier to get the job done and give you a completed cert. But the people now need to see the data in much more granularity, to see the work being done, where it's done, and stand over the changes or the upgrades that are done.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. How are you finding the industry? Look, I'm routinely quite critical maybe about slow adoption of new technologies, but I think that it's different when you're talking about a regulatory issue. And one thing I've really seen across not so much the construction industry, because actually they're quite good at this. They're a heavily regulated industry and they're quite good at it. But actually what I see maybe across the estate agency and property manager side, that there's a fear that comes when an issue is becoming regulated. So, for example, even in terms of when data protection legislation was coming in, and cost isn't the issue. It really is. There's a fear of not getting this right, and there's really a willingness to pay any cost to make sure that is right, as opposed to maybe enabling the team to upskill themselves. So that's something I've seen, that it's kind of an anomaly that falls outside of the usual rates of tech adoption. So in terms of compliance, the property services now is very heavily regulated in Ireland, much more so in Ireland than in the UK in terms of property managers. So how have you seen, when you go to pitch your services there, is there an awareness about this?
No, I think and the awareness of the responsibilities, absolutely. I think in terms of the adoption rate, you're right. I mean, property is an achingly slow thing. The buildings are going to be there for 20 years, and that determines the view of the people fighting fires in the asset or the managing roles that they're in. But when there is a legislative change, you do see a shift in gears. We've had to work quite hard at the same time, because there's a huge onus on us to bring a product that satisfies the customer, a worry that they're going to be covered. So when you're changing the rules, you're right, like they're probably less likely to do business as usual, and they are likely to spend money to make sure they're doing it right. But the flip side of that is you really have to be sure your product is right, and they have to be convinced by it. So that's been kind of the conversations we're having. And that comes back to building on standards and being able to prove the step-by-step. But I think in general, we're going to see a ballooning adoption in this space. There's a huge amount of software out there to enable this. But I think from our point of view, you can see networks like Vodafone's NB-IoT network, or perhaps local LoRaWAN networks, are going to make it extremely affordable for people to run the data directly from the building. And we see the future as that integrated. The building reports in itself. And you pay the money to get that, but you get 20 years of the building reporting on itself, which is a huge, huge saving overall operationally.
Do you think that that's something that's valued at the moment? We talk a lot about how the really the value that's yet to be unlocked in a lot of these portfolios is data, but I'm not sure that the construction, or sorry, the property industry in Ireland, I'm not sure if they're aware of it or if they understand that this has a tangible value.
Yeah, I'd agree with you with that. I think it's really a struggle. There's always a fire to be fought, and it's rarely our fire, if you pardon the pun and the imagery. But you're competing against whatever is on fire in the building in that given day, and it's rarely the data problem. And separately, if things are going well, there's always a resistance to change. It's like, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And trying to get people to jump in advance is very tough. But the value is there in the long term. And we think that the changes in how people have to address the safety. And we've done a lot of work with Limerick City Council and the fire department down there around safety in historic buildings. And I think what's interesting is the education of regulators around the technologies and what they can demand from the buildings will end up ratcheting in the adoption as well. Data isn't just for the property managers, it's also for the regulators. You've systems now that will allow you to reveal certain public facing information around your safety. There's no reason you can't run a safety rating like you do the BER. There's no reason in the world you can't gather and publish data around an ABC rating for safety in buildings. None at all.
No, that absolutely makes sense. Cian, before we let you go, what is the key message that you're putting out to building owners and operators for 2021?
COVID has made it really important to have low touch inspections of your buildings. Access is really hard. People are really afraid. You have to digitize now, and investing now, you'll reap the rewards for the next 10 years and be well positioned for the coming regulatory changes as well.
Okay, so that's it. Now's the time. Thank you so much for joining us. That's right. Cian, that was Cian O'Flaherty, CEO of Safecility. Oh my goodness, Cian. I'm so sorry. Safecility. So I'm delighted. The website is?
www.safecility.com.
Super, thank you. That's it from us today. Thank you for listening into Property Matters on Dublin South FM. Get in touch with the show on social media at iPropertyRadio, or indeed email the show at hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Also, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound and show producer Katie Tallon of Hear Me Roar Media. We're back at the same time next week. From myself, Carol Tallon, and all the team here, stay safe.